Can you hear me now? We're having technical difficulties, but okay. Hello, Katya. Hello, Katrusia. Okay. So, hello, everybody. Now you guys can hear me. I don't know what happened, but we're back. All right. Today we'll be talking about creative writing. If for any reason I mess up my words, it's because it's early in the morning for me. I'm in California right now. It's 9 o'clock, which, okay, maybe it's not super early, but it is for me. So, bear in mind. All right. I guess we'll get started. Okay. So, you guys can see. Okay, good. Today we're going to be talking about, I'll give you guys a little overview right now. We're going to be talking about what creative writing is, what does it consist of, how to get creative. Obviously, that's the hardest part. That's the bulk of this presentation. And can too much creativity be harmful? So when is it appropriate, pretty much? When is it appropriate to be creative? When should we not be so creative? In this, I will be talking about mostly about university and American university, and when I used it, when I didn't use it so much, but it definitely came, it depends on what you're studying and what you're writing, so I'll talk about that. Plagiarism, which is super important, especially for American universities, inspiration or stealing, and where's the line between those two. And the most important part of writing, which I don't want to give any spoilers. It's a surprise at the end, and it's my favorite part. Not really like my favorite, but I would say we have a love-hate relationship. But mostly I do love this one. I've learned to love it. You have to. So let's move to what is creative writing. Creative writing can be fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, journaling, and so much more. I can't describe all the ways you can write creatively. I'm sure you guys know that. But the purpose, I think, can be more exact. The purpose is to express something, right? Thoughts, feelings, emotions, right? You want the reader to understand, maybe also feel the same thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And usually you want these to resonate with your reader and make it clear. And I will give you steps on how to make that happen. Okay. Thanks, Malik. I feel like I have a fan page. Okay. So how do I become creative? I know that's kind of the hardest part. My first, biggest, main advice to you is to not say you aren't creative. I used to say that all the time. I used to say, I'm not creative. I'm so bad at writing. Which, I mean, if you don't like writing, then okay, that's your prerogative. But if you have to be writing for school or work and you tell yourself that, it's not going to make anything easier. It will make it harder. Your work will probably be worse than if you just believe in yourself and try. Maybe some people, of course, are better at writing than other people, but nobody's bad at creative writing. Nobody lacks creativity. I mean, I think about it and I say, why did I ever say that about myself? Like, I'm the person who daydreams all day thinking imaginary situations, right? And I'm telling myself I'm bad at writing and being creative. Like, it makes no sense. So my first point of advice, which I don't even have in my slides, but I'm telling you now, is to trust yourself and know that you can be creative. just, if you need help, then you can continue listening, and I'll tell you how to be creative. But don't tell yourself you're not, because it's not true. All right. Okay. So, how do I write creatively, right? Okay, I'm creative. I get it. But how do I write creatively? This might get mad. You might get mad at this, but there are no rules, right? You can write whatever you want, however you want it, right? Anybody can write. But if you're struggling finding inspiration or ways to express yourself, how to do it, then these are just tips to use, right? But I can't tell you, there's no prescriptive way, right? It's not like a lab report where they tell you exactly how to write it. These are just tips, right? How to become more creative, what can make it better if you're struggling. First, write about what you know. So we all come from different situations, right? Different backgrounds, we know lots of different people, interesting people, crazy people, awesome people, right? We all live in different areas, right? You might live in a village, you might live in a huge city, you might live with different people in a dormitory at your university. We all have situations that are familiar to us that we can use to inspire our writing, right? Also, write about what you don't know. It's also possible. I'm sure I could write, I don't have a sister, but I'm sure just the things I know from living 25 years so far, that I can write a story about a girl and her sister, right? If you've never had a romantic partner, I'm sure you could still write about, you can even write about a married couple, right? But the most important thing about situations, characters, and relationships is research what you don't know, right? If you want to include somebody from one background, right? Research or read a book with somebody, a character from, for example, I don't want to say America. I feel like lots of books are from America. Let's say a person from Zimbabwe, right? I'm sure none of us have been to Zimbabwe, but you can figure out information about it and include it in your story if that's what you want to do. And read a lot. I mean, that's self-explanatory. Reading really helps with writing, it helps with comprehension, and it helps with creativity. Your imagination starts churning and flowing, and in turn you become more creative and a better writer if you practice. So, all right. We have 5 tips now on how to become a better creative writer. Our first is show, don't tell. So use strong verbs. Choose specific, significant details, okay? I think a lot of times we get maybe carried away with creative writing, saying like, oh, I'm going to describe every single thing in this story, right? That's not a good idea. I mean, okay, you can do whatever you want, but I don't think that's a good idea. It kind of defeats the purpose. The reader will get lost and not know exactly what's important. What do I pay attention to, right? You don't need to describe every single little thing, right? But be specific and with significant details. And let the reader do the interpreting. For example, you say 2 plus 2, and the reader comes up with 4, right? You don't tell them 2 plus 2 equals 4. You tell them 2 plus 2, and they come up with 4. Let them do the interpreting. For example, an example for narrative writing, for example, would be, so narrative writing, you're telling a story. Bad narrative writing would be, this is what it feels like to have cool friends, right? And you just write, this is what it feels like to have cool friends. I feel like that would be very hard to write, first of all. Second of all, that would be very boring to read, and I don't think you would have your point come across as strong. As a good example of good narrative writing would be, okay, my friends and I, we went to the mountains, right? Me and my 2 best friends. We went to the mountains, we spent the night, we did these things. And this helps because it's easy to describe events but it's hard to describe emotions. But if you describe these events, what happens, this reader understands, wow, this person has really cool friends, right? If you ever think a character in a book is cool, it's not because the author writes, this person is so cool, right? It's because of the things they do. So if you ever feel stuck with trying to show emotion, just try and get your reader to interpret that from the events that you're writing about. So more, I guess, examples about showing and not telling is, for example, he was excited. Okay, we all know like what excited means. Okay, but a better way to say that is he laughed out loud. He jumped up and down and clapping his hands in delight. Right? It gives us more of a picture of exactly what this character is doing. Right? It's more descriptive. It's not so passive, and also we know from this action, right, this sentence, that this person is excited. That's usually what people do when they're excited. Another one, the woman was very rich. Okay. But you can instead say, the woman stepped out of her limousine with her designer purse in hand, diamonds glittered around her neck. You know this person's rich, right? Very rich, if they're in this situation. Also, kind of a side note, this can be useful when you're talking about certain areas or regions, countries, cultures, and what it's like to be excited in this culture, like what people do, right? What rich people seem like, right? Because a rich person in America might be different from a rich person in, I don't know, Ukraine, for example, Zimbabwe, bringing up my last example. So remember that. Just showing your audience, and they will, I guess, extrapolate and interpret the information the way they wish to. And it gives a better picture of like the setting and background of your story. All right. I guess like another example, he's generous. Okay, yeah, we get it. But if you show the person giving money, we will understand it's more active, and we understand that this person is generous. Okay, number 2, sensory detail. So, what do you see? Well, we know all our senses, right? See, taste, hear, smell, and touch. So, can you touch it? What does it feel like? Does it smell? What do you hear? And what does it taste like? What do you see? And not in the sense of like, oh, it's blue. Okay. We moved past that, right? So, for example, we have the heavy quilt, it's like a blanket, felt like an x-ray vest draped across our legs. Most of us maybe have gotten x-rays. You go to the dentist. I don't know, I've never gotten a dentist x-ray in Ukraine, but I know that these vests are super heavy. Everybody knows probably what that feels like, right? It helps the reader understand exactly how heavy this blanket is. And it gives a good sensory detail. The walls shook and vibrated like the tail of a rattlesnake. Okay, maybe in California, I definitely know what a rattlesnake is, but it helps the reader picture what you're saying, and it is much more interesting. It keeps the reader hooked in to what you're doing and what you're writing. Okay, next, my favorite one. Characterization. Super, super important. So I want you guys to think about your favorite characters from books or films. What makes them interesting and why do you like them? So I think a lot of times, at least when I write, I don't want to say everybody, but when I write, I think of, oh, okay, I'm going to write a character that is this, let's say, 18 years old, has brown hair, and is from England, right? And then their friend that's also the same age, and they're in high school. Okay, maybe 18-year-olds are in high school, but you get the point. And you think about your favorite character from any book or film and why you like them. I doubt it's because they're 18 years old and have brown hair and are from England. If it is because they're from England, like maybe then they have cool culture or they do certain things, right? But it's not just because they are from England and they are 18 years old, right? It's because of their personality, what they do, how they react to certain situations. So I want you guys to remember that specifically, that you need to, if you're writing characters, they have to be interesting and be dynamic. I mean, unless it's a background character. So first you have to build character. And how do we do that? We describe, or we show, not tell, right? We show what they like and dislike. What flaws do they have, right? We all have them, unfortunately. What motivates them? What do they look like? And how can you describe their personality? Again, we'll go to the next slide. We continue this. So how can you make an interesting character? So we should show their hobbies, their motivations, deepest secrets, greatest loves, maybe favorite flavor ice cream. My personal favorite, because I love ice cream. But this just helps build character. It helps them become more relatable and humanized, right? Rather than just a cookie cutter character with nothing important or interesting or defining about them. Also, how do they react in certain situations, right? How do they act if they're thrown in jail, right? How do they act when they win the lottery? What people do in situations that are very, let's say, stressful shows a lot about their character, and you could put your characters in different situations to show their personality and character traits, rather than just tell that they get angry easily, right? Show that, yeah, in a situation. How do they react when they need to cheer someone up? How do they react when they find a time machine? How do they react when they experience a huge earthquake? Coming from California, we do have lots of earthquakes, so I also had to include that. Yeah, if you think about characters in this way, for example, think of your best friend, right? If someone said, okay, describe your best friend, you probably would have lots of things to say about them and not just something very, I guess, shallow and boring, right? You'd say, they're an amazing person, and when they do this, they do this. They always make me feel better, blah, 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 right? Think of your characters in that way. Don't just have them as an afterthought. It's like a main part of your story. All right, I think we're on to the, okay, yes, we're on to the next one. Dialogue, also super important. Okay, that might beat out characterization. Dialogue's also super important. It helps with characterization, though, and it helps with building the story. Include dialogue in your stories. Obviously, not every single story needs dialogue, but I would say, for the most part, it really helps. And we find out about people we meet through what they say to us, right? Dialogue's super important. How they say it, their choice of words, their accents, their verbal habits, right? I probably say like a lot. People find out a lot about me because they know I'm from California, the way I speak, right? Readers should be able to do the same with fictional characters. People on the page really start to live when they start exchanging dialogue, right? It makes them more human and relatable and gives them more depth. Just like a person, when you talk to them in person, it's usually better than through texting, for example, or nothing at all. So communication is super important in books, and how people interact with one another and how they talk to each other can add to their character and the story. One note on said, he said, she said. Not every, okay, so I'm referring to, a lot of times said can feel repetitive, right? He said, I said, he said, I said. But the truth is, said doesn't need to be replaced so much. I would say 90% of the time, use said. And 10% of the time, use a word, an appropriate word. Not so like mathematical, okay, 10% I have to do, but that like ratio will help you. When it adds emphasis and it feels necessary, right? He answered, right? She asked. He ordered, right? But for the most part, you can continue using said. It's like not that big of an issue, but try and be conscious of when maybe there's a better word to use, right? So we have whispered, yelled, joked, asked, answered, thought, ordered. There's many more. You can just Google like words to use instead of said, and list will pop up, right? Never be afraid to Google things. I do all the time. For synonyms, I'm always on thesaurus.com. So even a native English speaker, I have a college degree, I still do it all the time. I still look up words. That's just a natural process of writing, and I'll talk about that more later. All right, sequencing. When you write full stories, you have a beginning, middle, and end, right? No matter how short maybe the ending is or beginning. In some stories, the ending is the beginning, but you understand. Mostly we have beginning, middle, and end. Sequencing events and putting them in order with words like first, then, next, after, finally, can help provide structure and help it move from one event to the next. What I want to say about this is that we have to have, I guess, a structure when we are using this in academic writing, right? Unless you're, I don't know, a creative English major and your assignment has nothing to do with being structured, then sure. But for the most part, if you're using an academic writing, you have to write an outline. You have to, because you have a prompt, right? You have a task to complete, and you have to make sure you complete that task. You can just write whatever you want to write and have no flow and have no points, right? Unless you're doing it for fun, or that's the assignment. But I would say make sure you have a structure. Make sure you write an outline before and do brainstorming. Yeah. So ensure, also, ensure your first sentences, paragraphs, or pages, it depends how long. If you're writing a book, then pages. If you're writing, I don't know, an essay, your first paragraph. But make sure they establish a scene, create conflict, or generate mystery. And maybe even 3, right? So this is like what we call in writing a hook. It draws the reader in, right? The first few sentences, you're like, wow, okay, interesting. And you want to keep reading. This is why, you guys know in books, a lot of them have prologues. And I will admit I always skip prologues because it's just background information, nothing interesting, nothing is really happening. I usually skip them. They're just not interesting. So don't make the beginning like a prologue, okay? And you can make it even all 3 of these things. Establish a scene, create conflict, and generate a mystery, right? Anything you want. So for beginning, we have first of all, these are very basic, like transition words, right? So first of all, I open the cupboard. To start off with, okay, I have a typo, ignore that. To start off with, we decided our destination was New York. Initially, I thought it was a bad idea. To begin with, I started my education in London. So these tell the reader, this is the beginning. Sorry, my mom keeps texting me. Okay. So this tells the reader this is the beginning, and it shows where they're at in the story. And it also shows that you might change, right? Initially, I thought it was a bad idea. But from that, you know that maybe you change your mind later, right? It creates intrigue. Continuing the story. But then we were sure everything was ready, but we discovered some unexpected problems. Yeah. It's again changing of situations immediately, right? After that, we knew there would be no problem. Next, we decided. Next is like the easiest one. As soon as we arrived, we unpacked our bags, and we also have then. Also very simple, but I know these are very simple, and maybe it seems like very elementary, but they are vital for your writing. Use them with purpose, and use them to create a compelling story with structure, because they are super important, and your reader will feel lost if you don't use them, okay? So I'm not going over these for no reason, just to waste time. They're super important. All right. Interruptions and adding new elements to the story, right? Adding suspense, adding maybe some drama. I don't know. So, unexpectedly, the people in the room didn't agree with the mayor. Suddenly, a child burst into the room with a note from Miss Smith. So this adds emphasis, and it gets the reader's attention. And it establishes a break to the norm, let's say, right? Unexpectedly. So now you know what the precedent was before and what had happened and how it's different now. So more normally people would agree with the mayor, but now they don't. Unexpectedly. What changed, right? Why don't they? It creates some intrigue. All right. Events occurring at the same time. I feel like I'm teaching English again, but I guess I kind of am. So events occurring at the same time, during plus noun or noun clause. During the meeting, Jack came over and asked me a few questions. We explored a number of approaches during the presentation. While as plus subject plus verb plus dependent clause or independent clause, while as. Okay. You can read that. So while I was giving the presentation, a member of the audience asked an interesting question. Jennifer told her story as I prepared dinner. This gives background information and helps establish a scene, right? Jennifer told her story as I prepared dinner. At least for me, when I see that, when I read it, I can picture in my head, right, what's going on. And this is a good way to establish a scene without saying, I was standing in the kitchen, right? It's important with writing and creative writing is not to use like stage directions. For example, if you have like a play and you have stage directions on it, right? Where the person is standing, what they do with their body, how they like interact with other people, right? It's all written down. You don't want your writing to be like that. You want to write about it in a way that doesn't seem forced, right? But the reader still understands what people are doing and where they are, right? Have you read a book and you're like, I can't even understand like what it's going on, right? The author doesn't use enough detail and you just don't really know what's happening. You have to read it again and again. Try and avoid that mistake, but don't go over the top and just say, she reached her arm out to grab and put her hand on the cup and lifted it to her mouth, right? If it is important, then yes, but you don't always have to do that. Just say she drank from the cup, right? She drank some water. Unless maybe it's like poison, then maybe you want to emphasize and slow it down. But okay. So ending of the story, we have finally. So finally I flew to London, right? In the end, he decided to postpone the project. And eventually we became tired and returned home. So sequencing is super important. What I would do is create an outline, beginning, middle, and end. And then you can always add later the sequencing, if it's not natural for you when you're writing, let's say like stream of consciousness, you're just writing, then don't add them. But when you're going back and rereading, find where it seems like it's necessary. We'll get into editing later, so spoiler. So I'll touch on that later. But for now, we'll move on to the next one. If you guys have any questions, you can ask me. I'll answer them by the end of the video, if I don't answer them in my presentation already. So, can I be too creative? Is it possible? Well, I would say no. If you're writing things that are not important and keep writing, I don't think that's too much creativity. I think that's just not being structured and focused. But I don't think there's never too much creativity. But there is a point when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. I will be honest. It's not very common in academic writing. Oh, okay. It's pretty much 99% of the time you aren't creative in academic writing. Depends, though, on what you're writing. For example, if you're in college, university, and you have to write a personal essay, then yes, you can be creative, right? If you have to write narratives, yes. Speeches, although they do have a structure and a point to them, an argument you have to make. You can still be creative in the way you use language and what stories you, I guess, tell in order to make your point, right? And marketing and advertising, although I don't know anything about marketing and advertising, I know you have to be creative, right? If you're writing ads or you're writing about a product, you have to be creative. And this is super important. I did skip the beginning. College application essay. I do want to touch on that in case anybody is thinking about applying to university. In America, we have a personal statement. It depends. There's different prompts, but usually you have to tell about yourself. For example, one of the most common ones is like tell about yourself and a challenge you faced and how you overcame the challenge. So the goal of a college application essay is not to create a piece of creative writing, right? Maybe if you're applying for a school that is about creative writing, that's your major, and it's appropriate for that, then sure, then you would submit maybe a creative writing piece. But the goal of a college essay in terms of creative writing is to use creative writing techniques to express yourself better. As we know, we can easily convey emotion and feeling and our ideas when we write creatively and we write effectively. And if you're trying to get across a message, right, how you changed, how a situation affected you, having these techniques will help you in order to create a compelling essay, and hopefully the college admissions reads it and likes it, right? So what I advise, I guess, you guys to do is to use a narrative style essay to write your personal statement or application essays, if you are interested in this. So you write in a storytelling style and voice. And this, in and of itself, creates a lot and it puts a lot of creativity into your essay. And when you're writing anecdotes, an anecdote, a short story, a small little story, not a joke, you can use creative writing tools to recreate and relate your mini story or what happened to the point of the essay, if that makes sense. So on the note, I guess we're going back up again, of academic writing. I wrote a lot of essays in college, university, and I didn't use, in English 101, like basic English class, we did creative writing, but I would say most of the time I didn't use any creative writing techniques, right? Which this is, my point isn't saying it's not useful. My point is like the opposite. But becoming a creative writer and knowing how to write creatively helps your critical thinking skills, and it helps you understand and identify meanings and ideas in literature. When you do research, you have to be good at understanding, identifying meanings and ideas, and you have to write about exactly that and make these connections and prove your point, right? I think like it all comes back to just being good at critical thinking, and when your brain is firing and creating synapses and connections, you just become better at understanding things. So it is useful. Reading any type of book will make you smarter. It doesn't have to be a book about science, right? It can be a book about really anything. But you will become smarter for it. And that's my point with writing. If you do creative writing and you're really good at it, I'm sure you won't be bad at academic writing, right? You won't be worse than any other person. That being said, for example, for my senior thesis, it was heavily based on research. Like the whole thing was research. But you do have the beginning, and you can write whatever you want to write. There's like a first paragraph, and for me at least, and you can write anything you want. And it's the same thing I talked about earlier with the hook, to draw the reader in, right? You can't just make up a story, right? But you have to use, right? You have to appeal to people's emotions, right? Create a story, word it in a way that makes it interesting. It makes it people want to read your 27-page paper with all these graphs and statistics, right? So it was super important for me to be able to write something that wasn't academic in the strict sense of the word, and use a lot of creative writing techniques. And that was one of the hardest things for me. I was like, okay, I can extrapolate this data, but oh my gosh. But in the end, it turned out good, and it's like one of my favorite parts of what I wrote. So no matter like what you're doing, I would say creative writing is super important. Okay, we have a question from Katrusia. Have you ever read to write a book? Actually, I have. But I want to write a collection of stories and like lessons I've learned in life. But the thing is, I have really bad memory. I have really bad short-term memory, but I have good long-term memory. So I feel like I should write things down, or wait like a month and I'll still remember it, you know? But I feel like I need to start writing them now. But I don't know. Maybe that's what I'll do during quarantine. Thanks for the question, Katrusia. Now I'm inspired. Okay, so we have our second to last point, inspiration or stealing. I know this is a common topic in Ukraine. Since there's a lot of plagiarism and cheating, I'll say it. It's true. But it's really hard to okay, obviously copying and pasting an essay and something somebody else wrote is obvious plagiarism. I don't think I have to tell you that. Using words that are not your own, that is plagiarism. I have a typo. I'm sorry. This is very unprofessional. So plagiarism is copying, not copying. Plagiarism, copying. If you write it yourself, it is not plagiarism. And I don't mean you read something and then memorize it and write it yourself. That's still plagiarism. But if you remember some type of story or some literary device somebody used and you write your version of that, that's not plagiarism at all. you are allowed to share so you're allowed to share inspiration freely. You're allowed to take ideas. But what you're not allowed to do is to look at someone else's execution of an idea, the words they wrote, right? And copy those words. That's plagiarism. There is one small caveat about fan fiction, which I know a lot of people write. So, fan fiction, so you're using people's characters, their story, their universes. For example, Harry Potter, right? You talk about Hermione and Ron and Harry. It is not plagiarism if you write fan fiction, unless you make a profit from it. So if you write about Harry Potter and you post it on your Tumblr page, then you're fine, right? But if you try and make that into a book and sell it, that's where copyright law comes in, and you might get in trouble. So my point is, you can do fan fiction, but just don't try and sell it. All right. If you guys have any questions about plagiarism, let me know. I lived for, oh my god, how long? 10 years. I had to learn about plagiarism and citations. So, for example, and I'll give you another example about plagiarism. You can copy people's styles. It's not plagiarism. Maybe if you copy somebody's exact style, it might seem cheap. It might seem like you didn't try so hard and that you're just pretty much copying them and you're not original at all. But also, it can be used to make a point, right? It can also, obviously, everybody takes inspiration from everybody. That's nothing that bad. Especially if you read a lot, you take lots of different inspiration. For example, if somebody writes with parallelism, for example, every paragraph starts with the same sentence or the same word, and you do the same thing, right? That's not copying. It's just copying and using a style. That person probably didn't even invent that. Obviously, that person didn't invent parallelism. But just don't copy and paste words, right? And people's executions of ideas, if that makes sense. I also have, there's a quote I have in the next slide. Yeah. So plagiarism is about putting outcomes ahead of processes. I think it's like a problem with the education system. I'm not going to get too meta about this, but when we have an essay and we say we want to get an A on it, we're more likely to plagiarize because that's our the outcome we want, right? And but if we think about the process of writing, right? That's the most important part, right? They say the most important part is the journey and not the destination. It's kind of like that. So you are putting the outcome, this A, ahead of any development, any writing development, any creative thinking, and I think that's the problem. A lot of us run into it when thank you guys for your questions. Okay, I'll answer them in a bit. So when we wait to the last minute, we're more likely to plagiarize, right? We need to turn the essay in by 12 o'clock. So, I mean, we've all been there. We had to turn our essays into a website that checked, if we plagiarized, so we couldn't plagiarize. Okay, I feel like this is going to turn into me telling you guys how to plagiarize. If you want me to do one about that, I can, but I'm not going to get into this video. I feel like I'm telling you guys some dirty secrets. Yeah, okay. So, the last and most important aspect of any writing, maybe anyone can guess. If you want to guess really quickly, you can. Okay? All right. It's editing! Okay, so that's where most of the writing is done. It's said that, for example, Ernest Hemingway we all know Ernest Hemingway, his book, A Farewell to Arms, he wrote 40 drafts, right? So it's a widely renowned book. And people say it's amazing, it's really good. And that's because he wrote 40 drafts. Can you imagine? I really can't. But it's where most of the writing is done. Writing is, I would say, 10% just sitting and typing your thoughts, right? And most of it is trying to reorganize your thoughts. What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? Adding words, taking out words, putting in explanations, adding details. So it's not the same as proofreading. So proofreading is spelling, right? Grammar. That's proofreading. It's more than correcting errors. Editing involves carefully going through your work to see what you should leave out, what you should change, what you have to do to improve your writing to make it more concise, right? This helps to polish and perfect through the editing process. If you were to see something I wrote from like the first draft, I'm sure you guys have also experienced this, and the last one, and you go, wow, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could write something this good because your first draft was so bad, right? But it's possible to write a really good essay. And I think the problem is you only ever see people's last final draft where they've edited and perfected it. So you just assume that's how people write. No, people probably have horrible grammar, have no flow, but they edit it and edit it and edit it, and it turns out really well. So that's my biggest advice is to edit and focus on editing, relying on editing. Obviously, if you have bad ideas, then and there's not really a point to your story, then there's only so much you can edit, right? But you can always add stuff. Some tips for editing is, my favorite one is to read out loud. When you read out loud, you realize how you're hearing it, right? Not just skimming it, probably skipping a bunch of words. You actually hear how it sounds, and it's much, much more easier to find mistakes. And you can understand, like, wow, wait, I already said that. That sounds weird. Or, what am I talking about? I need to explain this more. Or, okay, this isn't important. I want to, like, focus on this. It really, really helps. Reading it to somebody also. They can give you advice. Using active voice. So, like, instead of saying he was shot, you say, like, okay, I don't want to talk about violence right now. That's all I can think about. Okay, for example, the computer was turned off by the girl, right? Say the girl turned off the computer. There's no reason. Sometimes passive voice makes sense, but usually the goal is to not use passive voice as much as possible, because it makes your story boring and not active. That's why it's called active and passive voice. So try and use active voice as much as possible. Another tip is, I learned this in 8th grade, and I hated my teacher for this rule. I remember explicitly having a bad dream that I accidentally left this word in my essay, and I got an F on my essay, right? Like a 0%. Because she said she'd give you an F if you put this word in your essay. But it helps you become more creative, and the word is there, right? Like, there is 5, okay, that's wrong. There are 5 apples, right? Avoid using there because it is easy and it's kind of a cop-out. There are much better ways to describe something, right? 5 apples were hanging from the tree, right? Instead of saying there are 5 apples on the tree. Also, it goes with passive and active voice, using active voice. So my biggest thing is to avoid there, which is kind of random, but it really works, and it helps you rethink, like, how you want the reader to read this and how to word it, and if it's even important to have it all. Spelling obviously is important. Most computers have spell check or Grammarly. I use Grammarly. Another thing I learned, because it can be really easy to overlook spelling mistakes. I've had spelling mistakes in my presentation, so um, one thing, because when you read, for example, a paragraph, you've already written it, right? You know how it goes, and it's hard to actually pick out the spelling mistakes. But a tip is to read from the back or the bottom to the top. So read backwards, pretty much. That's what I'm trying to say. Read backwards. And so there's no flow, right? You're reading backwards. There's no flow to your words. You're just reading each word separately. And then you will see spelling mistakes if you, for some reason, don't have spell check, right? Maybe you're writing like on paper and you want to make sure your spelling is okay before you turn it in, right? Maybe you have a written test in school or university. That's like one thing that always works for me. All right. I guess that's all I have to say. I guess I'll answer your question. So I see some questions already on here. Katrusia, I answered you. Hola, which kinds of posts and stories on social media do you want to read a lot, and which do I skip? Wow, that's a good question. I don't know. Okay, I guess it's a personal preference. I really enjoy history posts. Usually like pictures and describing like what's happening in the picture. I really enjoy. I also really enjoy people, like, you guys know Humans of New York, like stuff like that, right? Like narratives, personal stories about people and what they've gone through. I always cry at them, so sometimes I avoid them, but yeah. Which ones do I skip? I skip a lot of ones that are like platitudes, which is like, platitudes are like basic things that people keep saying, like, we're all in this together, or like, just, that like don't have any actual like emotion or feeling behind them, and it's just, they're just saying what people keep saying, and that's what I usually avoid. Or any like toxic, but that's like more personal preference. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so writing style. So with writing styles, it can be lots of different things. So Olya asked what is considered a writing style. A writing style can be different literary devices you use. So if you use a lot of metaphors, right? If you use different structures. There's like a famous book by he's Latino, Hispanic writer, and his book goes like backwards, but it's like different chapters you can read in different ways. So that's like one type of writing style. Pretty much, it's like your personal kind of like fingerprint of how you format your writing, what literary devices you use, what words you use, how you use them. That's why usually a lot of people have like, I'm sorry, I can't, like, I don't know off the top of my head different types of like literary devices, but that's why like people have favorite writers, because they write consistently, usually not the same exact way, but they write with a certain style, and some people like some more than others, and that's why they read more books from one author. So I guess if you write more, you'll find your literary style. Okay. And from Kapustinsky, okay. What can I do when in my topic, most of the thoughts are already said? I mean, history, I'm not a researcher. What new can I... Oh, okay. Then what is plagiarism for me? Okay. So, good question. I can answer that because I was in the same situation in school, in like, university. Okay, I'm thinking of how best to say this. What I think is important. Obviously, like, a lot of people write about what we study, right? If you study politics or history or anything of the such, if you write a book about, like, if you write about World War II, yeah, like, do you know how many things are about World War II? It's just like beating a dead horse at this point. But my suggestion is to either find different perspectives or different, I guess, views and aspects of a situation, right? So be very specific. Like, one time I did an essay about, like, comparing transportation in the 1950s in Mumbai to transportation in Istanbul. Like, something very obscure, but that does have a correlation and would be interesting. That's one suggestion. I hope that makes sense. And another one would be, would you using different sources to compile information. So if somebody wrote about something, you can always have a different perspective, right? You can always use different resources and come up with, I guess, a different take on the situation based on your research. And it can also have, like, a different point. Like, what is the point you're trying to make with this research and with this analysis? Right? What's the moral of the story? What should people take home from this? I hope that makes sense. Yeah. If it doesn't, like, let me know. We have 2 minutes. Okay, also, what's your favorite source to stay inspired? Oh, okay. One thing is writing prompts are always super interesting. They challenge you a lot, and that's, like, one thing I would recommend definitely if you want to practice your creative writing, is to look at writing prompts. There's so many, and there's ones where you can challenge, like, write stuff you never have written about or you don't necessarily like, but also you can find ones that are something you would really love to write about, and it just gives you that kind of spark and idea to begin writing. Yeah, they're super interesting, I would say. But yeah, my advice is to keep writing, editing, and don't ever feel like you're not creative. Sometimes it can be hard to, like, but for me, I know it's true. It's hard for me to, like, put what I'm thinking onto paper, but if you just keep trying, it will eventually come out. I can promise. Yeah. So I guess I'll talk about, I'm in America right now. It's kind of crazy times. I keep getting alerts on my phone, and they're so scary. Not like the actual alert, but they go like bah, 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 on my phone, which my phone never makes that noise. So it's just, like, really shocking. And we have curfew, so we can't be out after 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 4 o'clock, depending where you live, unless, like, you're going to work or it's like you're going to the hospital. Streets are closed off. People are being attacked, like, protesters are being attacked. So I don't know. It's really crazy. I'm, like, trying to find a job, and then the whole pandemic thing, I was like, this is not gonna happen. And then with this thing, I'm like, okay, I'm not even going to try anymore. So I'm just hanging out at home, hanging out with my grandma. But yeah, okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's now been an hour. Wow, I didn't think I would make it this long with this presentation. I really thought it would not be so long, but I guess I can talk a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I guess let's see if there's any questions, but thanks for watching. Oh, also my favorite source to stay inspired, I can't talk anymore, is also, I like art. So I really like reading about art and different types of just creativity, not just writing, but just any art, fashion, and it helps me become more creative. Wow, thank you. I'm reading the comments. Oh. Okay, guys. Well, I guess I'll log off. There's a protest at 10 o'clock, so I think I'm going to go. So everybody have fun, have a nice quarantine, stay safe, and yeah. Now you have some creative writing to do during your time at home, being bored probably. Now it's summertime, so have fun. And I wish you all the best of luck and stay healthy.